Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be finishing up the suspension on the Patrol. It's a big day. We finally got our control arms in and our front suspension, which was out of stock for quite a bit. Little secret, we've been riding on the rear suspension only for a while. One of the first things I did when we got the Patrol is I tried putting a leveling kit for an older Armada on it. And I don't know if it would fit or not, but it was like 70 bucks on eBay, so I figured it's worth a shot. And it did fit, but the rear coil spacers, for whatever reason, didn't do anything. And I didn't figure out later it was because of the air struts that come on these. It limits the amount of extension that you get out of them. So yeah, it rode terrible. I don't recommend that. But the fronts were fine. It was just like a 2-inch leveling kit, so that's what's on there now. And that's the only reason it doesn't look ridiculous with the rear Ironman coils and stock fronts. But we're gonna be fixing that today because we finally got our front coilovers in. And to use the front coilovers, we needed to get new control arms. And we decided to go with DirtKing fabrication because their stuff looks pretty awesome. They offer a couple of different styles of front upper control arms. I decided to go with these because the model that's slightly cheaper than these comes with polyurethane bushings. I'm just not a fan of polyurethane bushings in general. I've had them on like my drift cars and just other cars in general, and they just always get noisy and they always start squeaking, and you grease them back up and then they're quiet for a couple of days and then they start squeaking again, and it's just the most irritating sound ever. So these come with 3/4 inch heim joints on the back and a 1-inch uniball in the front, which the spacers that come on this are just machined absolutely perfectly. I mean, you could see the level of quality in these. And the 1-inch uniball is better than like your standard ball joint because it'll let you get more articulation out of your suspension. And then with the heim joints at the end, that gives you a little more adjustability to dial in your camber and caster if you need to. So hopefully with that we should be able to fix the scrubbing issue with the tires hitting the back fender well on these. So yeah, stay tuned. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna disconnect the front sway bar. I'm gonna try to do this one side at a time as opposed to both sides at the same time like I did the rear, because I think that'll make it a little easier. Because for one, our jack barely reaches high enough to get this thing off the ground now, and if we're gonna lift it more, that might be an issue. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But in the meantime, I'm going to disconnect the front sway bar to let me work on one side of the suspension at a time. You need to do this while the vehicle's on the ground or completely in the air, because you can't have weight on one tire and another tire be up in the air, because then there'll be too much tension on the sway bar and you won't be able to get it off. So that's what we're going to do right now. Okay, so the front end links are going to be a 17mm nut, and we're going to loosen the top nut on the end link. And if you're wondering why I'm not loosening the easier to get to lower one, it's because that one started stripping out, so we're going to try this one. Thank God. Alright, so we're going to start taking the front suspension part, and driver's side, and our sway bars conveniently out of the way. And we're going to support the lower control arm with the jack. And now we can start working on unbolting some stuff. First thing I'm going to do is take the cotter pin off the ball joint. Alright, now we're going to try to unseat the ball joint. Just going to apply some pressure, just trying to spread it apart, and whack this a couple times. There we go. Could have used a fork style ball joint separator since this boot was already jacked, but this way is usually a little quicker. Alright, so we're going to remove the upper control arm. The back bolts here are 21 mil. I forgot to mention this front one is 19 mil for the ball joint. And you'll need to use a wrench because that's about the only thing you can get in on the back side. Nissan was kind enough to lock in the nuts on the back side, so you only got to worry about this one side.
Huzzah!
So this back one, it's behind the splash guard here, and these brake lines are kind of in the way, so not the best situation, but it's not that bad either. I'm going to disconnect this just to make sure I don't mess it up. Of course they had to make it more difficult. The brake lines won't let the bolt slide out. Alright, so you got to bend the brake line a little bit to get it out. Not too bad. Alright, so now we're going to take the shock out. And the top bolts are 14 millimeters and the bottom one is 21. I'm going to start by loosening these top ones. Oh, and here's evidence of that stock control arm hitting the shock tower, like I was saying. So now if we lower the jack, it should come apart. Really loosen the ABS sensor. Brake line's a little tight too. Let's see if we can make that work. Huh. You can see our leveling kit here. Alright, so we're going to remove the leveling kit off the top of this. Alright, so now we have our stock top mount, which we need to reuse for the Ironman shock. So we have the exciting job of getting this apart. Alright, so this top mount is apparently an 18 millimeter socket. Whenever I take shocks like this apart, they're usually for, smaller cars like an Altima or 240SX. And I usually just loosen this while stepping on this and just launch the shock out of the way. Those cars are a lot lighter than a Patrol, so I'm a little concerned this time, but Mama didn't raise a chicken. think these are directional. They both have the same part number. There's nothing to indicate whether it's a right or a left, so I'll just pick one. Okay, so to get the top hat on, we're gonna have to use the spring compressors to compress the spring a bit, because otherwise the threads won't reach all the way through the top hat. See, so now we can get our top nut on here. This looks awfully crooked to me, but I don't know how else it would go. This bottom part seems to line up pretty exactly. And the lettering is right side up, if that's any indication. Would have been nice if this had some instructions. Okay, so I took it back apart and I flipped the spring around, and it seems to fit a lot better. The top hat looks level now. So apparently the lettering is supposed to go upside down. Also, when you're putting the top mount on, make sure you have one of the studs in line with the lower mount. Otherwise, you're probably not going to be able to get it back in the truck. So since there's no instructions or anything, I'm not really sure where to put this lower mount. It's threaded all the way up to here, but I mean, obviously that's not gonna work. So I had to kind of like lower it to where there's like about a 1/4 inch of threads left at the bottom. I'm guessing this is just to accommodate different kinds of cars, because I don't really see all this being necessary for like this vehicle, but I guess we'll see when it's all together. Alright, so here you have the factory control arm and the DirtKing one. So you can see quite a big difference. Much beefier joint at the front and a lot more clearance, because these ones I hadn't even noticed they were already starting to contact on the shock tower. And this was only a I don't remember if it's a 2 or 2.5 inch leveling kit for the front, and it was already causing issues. I hadn't even noticed that, to be honest, but this obviously wouldn't have any clearance issues here. If you notice, it also has uniball in a slightly different position than stock. That's to help with caster correction and to keep the joint from binding at full droop, which the stock one would have problems with. So yeah, let's get this one on. Now for the fun part, installing the control arm. Ironman says to torque the uniball to 100 foot-pounds. So that's what we're gonna do. So we're still getting some contact on the strut tower here. So I'm thinking I'm just gonna smooth this area out, just so it's not gouging into the control arm. Our ball joint here is pretty much maxed out also, so it shouldn't really get us any more room or anything, but I don't really like the idea of this strut tower just like eventually digging into the control arm every time it hits full droop. So I think we're gonna just grinder this one. Alright, now we got a decent amount of clearance all the way around, so should be good here. Okay, so what we're doing right now is we're going to add a little bit of caster to the lower control arm. If you've raised your Titan slash Patrol slash Armada at all, you probably noticed that your splash guard gets caught on the tire. If you're running 35s or higher, I guess, I don't know, you probably wouldn't have the problem with like 33s or something. But if you have one of these, you probably at least have 35s. So this is how you fix it. Both mounts on the lower control arm have eccentric cams on them. So what you do is you loosen the nuts on both of them, and then the other side moves when you turn it. So what you want is to push this rear side out all the way, and then you move the front side in. Move the front side in all the way, and what that does is by moving this one out and the other one in, that effectively moves the lower ball joint forward, and that should take it away from the splash guard. But you need to have adjustable upper control arms when you get in alignment to be able to still compensate with your camber and dial in the caster more properly. Because we're still basically just eyeballing this, just adding caster just to get the wheel away from the splash guard. But we don't know until we have it on an alignment rack what the proper amount of caster will be. So the alignment person is the one that's going to deal with that. But now we just tighten these back up and should be good to go. Alright, so last thing is don't forget to bolt your brake line back up, your ABS sensor here, and the one we unplugged up at the top. So I wasn't quite sure where to set these collars up because I wasn't sure how related to the height and preload and stuff. So I just kind of guessed and just left a 1/4 inch of threads at the bottom. And that looks to be a decent amount because it's pretty close to the drive shaft here. So I wouldn't recommend going any lower than that because it might, through the range of motion, it might contact the drive shaft at some point. I checked with how it is right now and it doesn't contact at all, but it gets kind of close. But I mean, by kind of close I mean like, an 1/8 inch at the closest. So who knows? I'll let you guys know if that turns out to be a problem. But it was pretty difficult getting the spring on here even with this amount of room, so we'll see how it works out. All right, so we're done installing our suspension, and in doing so, that brought up a couple of issues. My first concern was the bottom of the coilover hitting the drive shaft on the front axle, and it looks like that's an adequate amount of room. I haven't seen any signs of contact between the two, even at full droop, or, well, I'm not so sure at full compression, but that also shouldn't be a problem, even though we haven't had it, like the wheel crammed up there all the way. Another thing is the front sway bar is kind of popping out of place in certain situations, and the rear camber is significantly out of spec, and the stock arms don't have enough room to compensate for it. So those are the biggest issues that we got to figure out right now. As far as the coilovers themselves, they ride amazing. I mean, better than stock and significantly better than the air strut garbage that we had before with the leveling kit. That was terrible. They ride great. They're pretty easy, straightforward install. The control arms also were just great, super high quality. My only criticism of the control arms is that they're not adjustable on the vehicle. So that's highly inconvenient, especially if you're taking it to get an alignment, because you can't dial in like your camber when you're there. What I ended up doing is I knew that the top of the tire was gonna have to go inward, so I just kind of adjusted them equally inward a little bit on both sides and just kind of crossed my fingers, and we got really close. We actually got 0.5 degrees of positive camber on both sides, so that's within spec. It would have been great if I would have nailed it at 0, but you know, I'll take what I can get. As far as the other issues, you guys will have to wait till I figure out what to do about that, and we'll make another video on it. So for now, thanks for watching. See you guys later.